Welcome to Pause It For Me, episode 59, where we're going to be talking about Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now. I have a feeling this is going to be a big one, because we're talking about not only Apocalypse Now, but also
Hearts of Darkness. It was very exciting to watch, that's for sure.
So Apocalypse Now from 1979. For those who don't know, the logline of Apocalypse Now is: a U.S. Army officer serving in Vietnam is tasked with assassinating a renegade special forces colonel who sees himself as a god. Now, to start off, we're listening to The Doors, which starts and ends the movie. The End by The Doors from their first album, The Doors. I have it right here on vinyl. And I feel like
it's a great choice.
I feel like it's thematically appropriate for us because we're getting to the end of our podcast here. This is the second last intended episode of this run. Our last episode talking about a specific movie, and probably our last episode in this apartment. And you'll have to wait to see what that means for hopefully our plans come to fruition for our final episode.
Definitely bittersweet.
And to celebrate the occasion, I think I'm actually going to crack one of these open for the first time. Yeah, they've been sitting
This is pretty old.
in this
Good luck with that.
in this little display for, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years.
What does it say on the best before?
It doesn't matter. I'm sure it'll be delicious nonetheless. Prepared myself a little ice cube. Do you want the grape one? Or are you good?
No, I'm good.
Best before, I don't think it actually says. I mean, it's very sugary. I'm sure it's fine. It's preserved.
I picked a jungly mug because I thought it was theme appropriate. I'm also wearing army green.
Yep.
And I could see that you were doing the same.
Well, I'm wearing my little leaf necklace here. I'm going to bring down the doors just a little bit. Once it gets more intense, I think I'll shut it off.
Okay.
So we watched Apocalypse Now last night, and we watched Hearts of Darkness today, this morning. And I have not been this excited for starting an episode in a long time. Let me just say, and I said this to you last night, after we finished it, it was like 11 at night. It was too late to watch Hearts of Darkness, and it was too late to record the podcast episode. But I found it extremely difficult not to start talking about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, throughout, I couldn't help but say stuff while we were watching both of the films. Because I'm like, this is, for me, it's also part of the experience of watching a film is taking it in and enjoying it and stuff. And I didn't want to, completely hamper my experience. But yeah, I definitely, there was a lot I wanted to say, more than I even did, and talk to you about it. So I'm excited to get into it with you.
So let's talk about background first. I'll talk about mine, and then you talk about yours. So for me, I had first heard of, quote unquote, this movie, seeing the DVD in my dad's DVD collection. And let's talk about that really quick. So we have the Blu-ray lent to us by my brother. Holding it up right here for the video watchers out there. This is the cover for the Blu-ray. It's not the typical cover that you see for the movie, but it's cool. It's very nice. I happen to have screenshotted here what I would say is the typical cover that you see. So
Okay.
I'm turning it around so that you can see. And
That's very interesting.
I don't know if the audience will be able to see that, but I'll hold it up.
They sure
regardless.
give Marlon Brando a lot of
Right. Well, he's clearly like a
poster.
messianic
Yeah,
figure.
that's
Whatever
true.
the right term is. Now, would you like to see the cover that was the version that my dad had on DVD?
Sure.
Here it is. Sorry for our audio listeners.
That is really boring.
It's terrible. It's the title font, Apocalypse Now, flipped on its side on a black background with nothing else. And it says Apocalypse Now Redux.
That's terrible.
Terrible. Really, really bad. So that's when I first heard about it. And seeing this cover, I was like, I don't know what this is about.
It's not really that
Yeah.
appealing looking. There's nothing about that title or it doesn't seem like it's about the army or anything really.
Yeah, didn't look into it further than that. Several years after that, I sat down to watch it with my brother. I'm pretty sure he had seen it before and was trying to show it to me. And much like several films that we talk about on the podcast, we got maybe like half an hour, maybe 40 minutes in to the scenes with Kilgore, with Robert Duvall, and we stopped for some reason. I think we made it to the Ride of the Valkyries scene.
Okay.
With like when they're playing Wagner flying in on the helicopters.
What a needle drop, by the way. I was thinking of that because we did our needle drop episode. Now that's a needle drop.
Definitely. So that's about as far as I got, and I wasn't loving it. The only thing that I really remembered was the opening with the doors, and then Kilgore saying, "Charlie, don't surf." That's all I remembered.
It's pretty funny.
And this is I think it's one of my brother's favorite movies. And my brother and I tend to, we like similar movies, but we love different movies, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fair.
His favorite movies are very different than my favorite movies. So I went into this the second time knowing what I was in for, because I had seen the first chunk, but still kind of ready to not like it. In fact,
I understand that.
I think I had heard from Abed on Community that supposedly he thought Hearts of Darkness was better than Apocalypse Now. So that's the mindset that I went into.
Sure, yeah.
How about you?
I definitely had heard that perspective as well. Having seen both, it's just not comparable. One of them is about a real story and one of them is about a fake story.
Yeah.
So, obviously the documentary was great because it was capturing real, authentic moments, but the cinematography of Apocalypse Now was beautiful. I think it's apples and oranges.
Mm-hmm. So I asked you right before we started the movie what you knew about Apocalypse Now, and what did you say?
I don't even know if I knew it was about the army. I just said that I think that it's about like a boat on the water.
Yep.
And that Marlon Brando plays like a crazy man, and he was like a nightmare to work with, and he couldn't remember his lines, and that it took forever to shoot. But I didn't actually know like a ton about the actual film itself. Which is funny because in Hearts of Darkness, I feel like they didn't, like, you could see the cue cards in a lot of the shots, but they didn't really go into the fact that they had to hold those up, and I thought they would go into that a little bit more.
I think it's because they pivoted and said that they ended up going mostly improvised with Marlon Brando. So there wouldn't have been cue cards because he was just making everything up.
I think that was probably the smart move because it's more authentic.
Marlon Brando has got to be like the worst, greatest actor of all time.
It's like he stumbled into it.
Not the greatest, worst actor of all time. That would be Tommy Wiseau.
Yeah.
But worst, greatest actor of all time.
It's like the final performances he gives are good. Maybe not mind-blowing, but it's good.
Entrancing.
So. I think, but like his natural self is entrancing. It's like, I don't know how much nuance he's really bringing to his characters, you know? They're all like a shade of Marlon Brando, which is fine. A lot of actors are like that, but yeah, I could see what you mean by that. Like, I thought his performance was good, but Martin Sheen's is better.
Right.
It's a lot more nuanced.
So we've talked about kind of the setup, what we thought going into this. So let's dive into it kind of from the beginning. I'll take this opportunity to bring down the doors. Thank you, Jim Morrison. So starting off, do you want to go through it like sequentially, like our thoughts as we watched it? Okay. So I thought it was one of the strongest openings to a movie I've ever seen. And
well, there was no credits the whole movie. That was insane.
That's what I was going to say. I think the reason why I found it so provocative for me is because it was shot like, I don't know if I would say a typical opening credit sequence, but like it wouldn't be out of place. This kind of sequence wouldn't be out of place in other movies if there were credits over it. But the fact that it played out as it did with no credits over it just drew your attention to the visuals so much more in a way that I don't think you would feel quite as sucked into that opening if there were credits over it.
Definitely. I just love how they did this technique a lot where they would superimpose kind of Martin Sheen over different like war imagery. He's upside down, like just so many like iconic shots, the way they like framed and lit it. And then the track, obviously, it was a perfect melding. And, I didn't really realize because we were watching Hearts of Darkness that he was really drunk and all those things were kind of a shade of his own persona, which I found really fascinating. because he punched the mirror and that was real, and I was like, that was real? What?
Yeah.
And so it was crazy, and I think it definitely added a lot to it.
The thing that I think will set the tone for our discussion around this movie for me is that I have so much that I want to say all at once.
Yeah.
I want to talk about every aspect of the film all right this very second. And I just want to like speak 6 sentences at once, basically. I'm having trouble deciding where to land first.
I know. I feel like it's hard to talk about the documentary without mentioning, like, because it goes hand in hand, and there's just a lot you could say about it. We can maybe start with this. Is they originally cast Harvey Keitel, and they shot like 3 weeks with him or something, and then they're like, this is not good, and they recast him.
I don't think Keitel would have brought the right stuff to this role from what I've seen him in.
I don't think it would have been as nuanced. It was really interesting seeing Martin Sheen in a role like this, though, because all I've seen him in is being like a comedic old man.
Yeah, I mean, well, because you watched
Grace and Frankie.
And he played Uncle Ben in Spider-Man.
Yeah.
We've never seen West Wing or anything.
Oh, true. Yeah, he's pretty big in that. I think he plays the president.
Yeah, Martin Sheen, excellent. Really excellent. Really great. And I don't even know if I would have been able to like picture Martin Sheen doing this role without having seen it first. Like in the same way that I'm saying like, oh, I don't know if Harvey Keitel would have been good. I don't know if I would have thought Martin Sheen would have been good in a role like this before seeing it. But now that I've seen it, I'm like, he was excellent.
I think there was probably a precedent. I think he was in a bunch of other thrillers and stuff pre this.
Sure.
So it was a lot more like those kinds of movies is all about face acting. And a lot of this character is face acting because he doesn't have a lot of spoken out loud dialogue. You know, a lot of it is like monologue in his head. Yeah. So I think you really have to say a lot with a little. And I think he really brought it to the table. And just like the way some people just have great faces for cinema, the way like that the light hits them and catches their eyes and stuff, it was stunning.
I think the narration is a good place to start and move forward from. Because I thought the narration was excellent. And in like just very intense and perfectly executed.
It could go either way. Something like Blade Runner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't seen the cut of Blade Runner that has the narration, but I want to see it because I'm not a big Blade Runner fan. And I feel like I would maybe enjoy the version with narration more.
Because it was supposed to be kind of like a play on noir.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, for something like Blade Runner, we saw the final cut. Yeah. Whereas for Apocalypse Now, we chose to see the theatrical cut, not the redux, not the final cut.
Yeah.
And do you know what the major differences is? Because I would love to know.
I can bring up what my brother said to me when I asked. So the redux is cut with 50, that's 50, extra minutes, mainly focused on scenes that give more context to the history of Vietnam with regards to being colonized by the French. It's already a long movie to begin with, and the extra redux scenes are honestly kind of boring. There's another cut he did within the last few years that's supposed to be a final cut, which I hear is a middle ground between the two, but I haven't seen that. So just watch the original. That's the instruction that we got.
Well, in The Hearts of Darkness, he talked about how they shot the French scenes, and he's like not happy with the cast, and they're like, let's pretend that didn't even happen. Yeah. So I don't know.
Because there were already cut scenes. Like if you look into it, there's the theatrical cut that we watched and the redux and the final cut. But even before the theatrical cut, like when it premiered at Cannes Film Festival, it was already longer and it was cut down from there. So I can weigh in on this on a personal level a little bit in that, you know, we made a short film recently called Unsubtitled. And we screened it at a couple of small film festivals in Ottawa. And after I screened it, I was able to watch it with an audience for the first time and for the second time. And it was very different from watching it in my edit suite through headphones on my monitor by myself. And I realized that some parts didn't play very well in a theater with an audience. And I'm inspired to go back and change those pieces a little bit and make like a definitive version. Now, personally, I feel like that's different from George Lucas going back like 10 or 20 years later and changing stuff, because that's really like
Right.
it was kind of set in stone and everyone fell in love with it, and now you're changing it. Whereas with something like Apocalypse Now and with unsubtitled, it's more like the debut screening is almost like a form of a test screening, and after that, I feel like the version that went out to theaters should be considered sort of like the definitive version at the time.
Right. Well, we've got into this with Star Wars several times,
Mm-hmm.
is what we don't like about George Lucas changing it is not necessarily the fact that he creatively wants to change it, is the fact that each new version is the definitive version in his mind, and the other ones are like put away in the shelves.
Yeah, they're not really available anymore.
Whereas this, we have access to this, we have access to Redux, we have access to the final cut.
Yeah.
So it's up to the viewer to choose your own adventure of what's the best version for you.
Yeah. The more cuts, the merrier.
I suppose so. Yeah, I found it really interesting, the things that they chose to leave in and what they chose to leave out. But I think it's solid story the way it is now. And I found it really compelling the way that they're talking about how it was supposed to be like an idiot odyssey. Like a dumb Homer's Odyssey, where it's like all about the journey and like the things along the way, and then you have like the final thing. And I found it really interesting to put it that way, because in some ways it felt meandering, but I think it was more supposed to be like a scope, a window into the real life of Vietnam. Definitely. And its insanity.
Yes. Yeah.
Especially because it was like fresh off the heels. They wanted to like actually shoot in Vietnam, and people are like, no. So
originally,
then they had to do something similar, and there was still war going on in the Philippines.
Yeah. So
that was pretty insane. And I think it was really funny that Eleanor and Francis decided to bring their 3 young children.
Yeah, like
to a war-torn country.
Can you imagine making like one of the most complicated films to ever be put to screen?
Yeah.
While toting around like your 3 kids into to another country?
Yeah, a 4-year-old in a war-torn country, and your wife is busy filming the behind the scenes. Like, who's watching these kids to make sure they don't die?
It was a different time.
I mean, I can't say that we won't do the same thing at some point. I'm not one to judge, working parents, it's hard out there.
Yeah. So going back to the narration, well, we were talking about the different cuts. Last thing I have to say about the different cuts is, and I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit, but just to cap off that discussion, coming out of this movie, I was kind of like, why would you need a different cut? Like,
yeah.
This was obviously, in my opinion, only motivated by Francis Ford Coppola's personal desires. I did not feel like a different version of this was necessary.
I don't need it to be longer, honestly. I think it's good the length it is.
Yeah.
I think it has the right amount of journey and then destination.
Sure. Yeah. So the narration, part of the reason why I thought it was so effective had to do with more of the overall storytelling. As we've gone over in movies like Lawrence of Arabia, I can have a really hard time following complicated movies.
Definitely.
Sometimes. And there were some similarities between this movie and the plot of Lawrence of Arabia. And
it's about a war.
It's about a war and a guy who keeps returning to the war front, feeling like he can't return to home and civilized life. And then they make a journey towards a destination to enact this specific plan. Blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
Do a very general comparison. But I found Lawrence of Arabia kind of hard to follow. This, I felt like the plot and the goals were talked about in such clear, real,
absolutely.
Solid terms that at no point was I confused.
Well, I think that's the point.
Never confused.
Because the military is all about rigid structure and making really clear decisions and putting things out there. And I think that makes a lot of sense for the narrative that they're trying to tell.
Yeah. And I think the narration helped that a lot. And that if a scene was playing out, even if the scene itself was confusing, Martin Sheen usually kind of, or sometimes his brother, filled in for narration.
Really?
Apparently, because Martin Sheen was not available during the editing process.
Well, he had like a heart attack during the making.
Yeah. So Martin Sheen would really kind of nail it down in pretty clear terms in the narration.
Definitely.
Not to say I don't think things are like overly explained. I don't think it's really like hammered in. It's just it's explained the correct amount.
I would say so.
I
yeah.
would say
Giving just enough motivation to the character without him saying out loud necessarily to the other characters, other than like a clear mission statement.
It was clear it was based on a book in that sense, is because so much of what this character goes through over the course of the film happens in his mind.
That's true.
And not outwardly, as he comes closer to his target and thinks about him and like relates to him and almost sympathizes with him at times in a way. And I think it would not have been the same, and it would not have been as effective of portraying what was going on with that character if there was no narration.
Right. Well, I think it's a soldier's tale, a veteran's tale. We see that a lot. I think it's sort of like a pre-First Blood. And
yes.
I definitely saw comparisons to Metal Gear as well.
Okay. Interesting, yeah.
Just, a lot, I feel like Hideo Kojima was probably inspired by that kind of stuff. First Blood is, the veteran, especially in the beginning.
Yeah.
Is, he spent his whole time while he was there thinking about going home, and then he spent his whole time while he's at home thinking about going back.
Well, I think it was slightly different between the two characters, but I did draw a lot of comparisons myself as well. Like, I was thinking about First Blood a lot while watching this. And they're such differently crafted movies.
Oh, yeah.
Like, for sure.
I think it's just about the plight of the veteran and PTSD and, being trained to be like a brutal soldier, a weapon,
Yeah. It was like what Martin Sheen's character Willard went through was like he came home and tried to acclimate back to society, but felt like he couldn't and felt drawn to go back. Whereas Rambo tried to acclimate back to society and felt like society didn't want him anymore.
Right, exactly.
And like he wanted to be there, but he was just like pushed out, basically. And he returned to that like primal warlike sense in his mind, like by default, honestly.
Well, I think it's really hard for, a soldier to change that mindset because you're in one country and it's like, oh yeah, it's okay to murder lots of people because you're doing it for your country, and then to go back home and then try to live a normal life after destigmatizing and seeing all this brutal violence and stuff, like that really messes with your mind. I found it really interesting in Hearts of Darkness. They talked about how they added this scene of them going up to the Viet Cong boat that has the puppy on it.
Yeah.
And, it's just like an added scene for carnage, I guess. But I found it to be really important because they attacked these people basically for no reason. They just got scared.
Yeah.
And then there was a woman like severely wounded, and they're like, okay, we have to like bring her to like an emergency thing. And Martin Sheen just like shoots her cold, like puts her out of her misery or whatever. And they're like, in his inner monologue, he's like, it's so contradictory.
Yeah.
Is they're willing to kill them, but if they're injured, they're willing to assist them. And it's just so messed up, like seeing all this war stuff. Like there's a scene earlier with Robert Duvall where the guts are spilling out and he gives him water. And it's like, you're willing to kill these people, to massacre them, but you're also helping them. It's like, I don't know, very contradictory.
That really happened.
I bet it did.
Yeah, that was based on a real story.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I felt like there was so much under the surface for this movie that, like, I don't know, someone, I mean, probably not, but someone may look at this movie and be like, yeah, America, Ride of the Valkyries, like triumphant, but it's so, it's meant to be portrayed as like ridiculous.
It is,
and stupid, that it's like the Americans feel so triumphant in this moment, but it's all just like senseless carnage, and it's like
absolutely.
It's like a day at the office for Kilgore. He's like drinking coffee, and he's like more concerned with surfing after the battle than like the morality of what he's doing.
Yeah, I love the smell of napalm in the morning. I think that's the kind of stuff that like, patriotic people would be like, yeah, but it's like you're not getting what this movie is about.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, you could interpret it that way, but I feel like you'd You have to be a special kind of someone to.
I think there is people out there that
to
would
come out of this movie and be like, yeah, America, guns and war and stuff.
Because you see at the end, Kurtz go crazy from the madness of war, and they say he's like a god in their mind because he's playing with life and death. But it's the same for all of these soldiers. Is they're in a position to take away life instantly. It's just crazy.
I really love that about this movie. And I felt like it's my favorite. I would say it's my favorite war movie that I've seen.
Interesting. I'm on the fence.
What you think Full Metal Jacket is better? Yeah.
And well, it's also about the Vietnam War. I don't know when that came out, though. I have a feeling it's maybe after.
Right. I consider I don't consider The Great Escape a war movie. I consider that a war adjacent movie. Because it's not really showing
it's not in the trenches.
The realities of war. Yeah, it's not in the trenches.
Right.
Yeah, because I've seen Platoon, and I don't. If you ask me what I remember about Platoon, I remember Willem Dafoe going like this, and that's about it. Starring Charlie Sheen, by the way.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, see, the thing is I don't care about war. Like, I'm a pacifist. I'm not interested in seeing the intricacies of war and fighting the enemy and stuff. So I found it way more interesting for a more inner tale, more of a battle with oneself, pretension.
Okay.
Well, that's what Francis Ford Coppola talked about. He's I'm not trying to make a pretentious film. Everyone's like, you ride the line between greatness and pretension. At this point, I'm like, I'm just going to make it. I don't care what anyone's saying.
He said that.
Because I feel that is so real, where it's like, if you go one way, it's the best thing ever. If you go another way, it's pretension. And
he was very self-aware about it, that he's like, I know I'm bordering on being pretentious, but I just want to make it the way I want to make it.
I think that's the best way to do it, because if you're looking at outside forces too much, you're going to be more pretentious, I think.
Interesting. So back to the plot. Yeah, I felt like it was very easy to follow, which I was not expecting for a movie like this, especially a movie of a certain length. And not only that, but character names were clear, like Willard, Kurtz, Chef, Lance, Clean, Chief, Kilgore. There was never confusion about who was who.
Yeah.
By the end, at least, or by the midpoint.
There's certain movies where I'm like, I like this movie. I don't remember anyone's names.
But yeah, by the end of the movie, I feel like there was a show we watched recently, or no, it was Spotlight. We watched Spotlight, and at a certain point, 3/4 of the way through, they said Rachel McAdams' name, and I was like, oh, was that her name? Huh.
I honestly don't remember almost anyone's name from that movie, and we saw that a week ago.
Robbie. Someone was named Robbie. That's about all I remember.
Yeah, I think that was Michael Keaton's character. Other than that, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it helped that they had nicknames, but
sure, yeah.
I think I've kind of showed my hand by this point a little bit, in that I think you can tell I liked this movie.
I knew you would.
You knew I would, really?
Because one of your favorite books is First Blood.
Yeah.
And films, and you love the Metal Gear series, and that's all about being a soldier, the mindset of a soldier, being a team.
Yeah.
It seemed like it would be this is a solid Metal Gear story, where you have this, veteran soldier where he's the best. He has assassinated people before. We need to get him to assassinate someone that's gone rogue. It feels very in line with that series, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're right about that. Aesthetically, it's pretty similar to Metal Gear Solid 3, although that's about a soldier at the beginning of his career.
In a jungle.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I totally hear what you're saying. Now, pivoting topics a little bit, I want to say, and the Oscar for Best Sound goes to...
Not our podcast.
the car alarm going on out the window. Apocalypse Now! I felt like this movie had some of the best sound, maybe the best sound of any movie I've seen. And why is that? The mixing was on point. Time and time again, when we watch movies in a home environment, the movie will start and we'll set it to a certain level, and then a loud scene will happen, and it's just a bit too loud, and I'm worried the speakers are going to get blown. So I'll turn it down just a little bit so that the loud parts still feel and sound loud, but it's not going to break anything. And I'm like, okay, we're good now. And then they go to a quiet scene, and it's like dialogue is like down here. All of a sudden, you can't.
Yeah,
hear
it's so annoying.
And I'm like, ugh. Now I got to turn it up, and so in order to be able to hear the dialogue, because I'm missing stuff, and I'm going to be confused in the plot. And then when I turn it up, the next loud scene is going to be way too loud, and it's just gonna ruin it. But from the beginning of this movie, in the opening scene, I dialed in the volume, and from there to the end, it was perfect.
That's true.
I didn't have to touch it once.
I didn't notice it too much.
Yeah,
you know?
The loud parts felt loud, but not like the speakers were going to blow, or like not like I was going to upset our neighbors. And the quiet parts were still audible.
Definitely.
They still felt quiet, but an appropriate level.
It also speaks volumes, because they were like, they were on location for almost a year. And, you know, it's not like they were in a sound studio. Granted, a lot of the sound came from narration, but still, I think it was on point for especially the circumstances they were under, because it was an insane shoot all the way around. Much
like the movie Castaway, evidently, I think from what I've read, the majority of the dialogue and sound had to be replaced in ADR.
Right.
And I didn't think, once in a while it did, but I didn't think it showed that much. I think they did a good job of ADRing.
Because sometimes you'll see a movie and it's very clear they're in like a room with a lot of room tone, and then you'll hear an out-of-pocket ADR line that sounds straight out of a booth.
I talked to Bazzini.
And it's really distracting.
That line is in The Godfather. In the Godfather, there's a scene where this guy's like, blah, 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 and then I talked to Bazzini. And it's not only was it clearly not recorded on the day, it doesn't even sound like the same actor.
Right.
So Francis Ford Coppola clearly learned his lesson after that.
It's like, how hard is it to like just not go to a sound studio, grab a mic, and like put them outside, so at least the room tone sounds similar? Yeah, well. That's how Wes Anderson recorded Fantastic Mr. Fox, is he went to real locations. You know, it was in the woods, they recorded it in the woods, you know, and I appreciate that commitment to cinema for sure.
So not only was the mixing good as far as that went, but the design I found was incredible. I really enjoyed some of the decisions that they made.
Definitely.
Where there were certain scenes, I can think of two off the top of my head, where they dialed in the sound so that the audience was only hearing specifically what the filmmakers wanted them to hear in that moment. The first one is when they're in the trenches and the guy gets the grenade launcher and he shoots it like across the way. All the sound goes down.
That scene was perfect.
Yeah, all the sound goes down and you only hear the sound of the guy loading the launcher as shooting it and the enemy across the line shouting, and then the explosion. Whereas before that, the scene was really loud, and they just they dial it all down until you're just hearing these 2 or 3 elements. And then the same with the scene at the end when Martin Sheen walks out and they all lay down their weapons as he walks out. The only thing you hear during that scene is the sound of the weapons clattering to the floor. There's no room tone. There's no bugs. There's no campfire.
It was a big moment.
Yeah.
So it let the audience breathe and really feel that moment.
Yeah. So the sound, unlike the car alarm going on outside still, which I hope is not our car, by the way, was really on point. Well done. And do you want to know who edited the sound in this movie?
Who?
Mr. Walter Murch.
Amazing. He did a great job.
This is a good book on editing, In the Blink of an Eye, a perspective on film editing by Walter Murch. I recommend it.
He definitely nailed it all around.
Yeah.
And, you know, for a war movie, it's very easy to mess up sound editing and mixing. Yeah. And they did a great job of it. And just to go back to the grenade launcher scene, that scene, the way it was lit, fantastic. Because it was pairing the silence of the moment with the grenade launcher with like this spinning light thing going onto Martin Sheen's face, where it lights like half of his face, and he's like, who's your CEO? Yeah. And it was just perfect. Just all around.
The lighting across the board in this movie.
Amazing.
Shot composition, like the cinematography on the whole was second to none.
It really makes this whole movie, because I care way less about, you know, a war movie. I just like a really well shot, really well done movie. And this accomplishes it all around. They could have gone so many different ways with the way that they chose to light it. I think the way that they chose to light Kurtz really made it too. They made him like mostly shrouded in shadows and stuff. I don't think he would have been nearly as intimidating if you saw his full body fully lit all the time.
Yeah. I think part of that, excuse me, pardon me, this soda is going right to my tummy. I think part of that was based on circumstance. I would hope that there was vision behind it, but part of it was based on circumstance in that when Marlon Brando showed up, he was more overweight than intended.
He's supposed to be gaunt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would it surprise you to know that Marlon Brando is only 5'7"?
That would surprise me.
They shot him in such a way that he didn't just look overweight, but he looked like towering and imposing.
They definitely nailed that.
So they tried to use the weight to their advantage.
They shot
in that
upwards,
regard. Yeah.
To make him look bigger.
Yeah, like friggin' Vincent D'Onofrio and Daredevil looking, and Full Metal Jacket to a certain degree, looking massive, absolute unit.
Definitely.
But yeah, just
Martin Sheen's not that tall, I don't think.
I'm not sure.
Next to Sam Waterston, his companion in Grace and Frankie, he's like a foot shorter than him.
Right. Yeah. He looks pretty short in Spider-Man. But yeah, the way that they shot and portrayed those scenes, like they knew that they had the audience glued to the seat by that point in the movie. Like if you watched all 2 hours or whatever to the point when Marlon Brando shows up, you are there. You are glued
they give enough
to
setup.
the razor's edge of your seat, and they know that they have you, and you're waiting to see just a glimpse, a hair more of Marlon Brando's face, and they keep it shrouded like as long as possible.
I think in a similar way but different with Hannibal Lecter is there's a lot of talk about who Hannibal Lecter is before he's actually seen, so it builds up the character to be something more than it is. Sure, and it's the same with Kurtz, is he gets all the info about his past and who he is. He really gets into the mindset of him, and he's like, I'm excited to meet him, but I'm afraid to face him, and like we're in this mindset too. It's like all of this is leading to this moment, and I think they did a great job of it.
They do that kind of thing in video games too. Like that's true. You know, James Rolfe talks about in the original Legend of Zelda, people talk about Ganon, and the instruction booklet talks about Ganon, but you don't see him until the end, and then it's like, whoa.
Final boss.
Yeah. So I just felt like the vision for everything in this movie
amazing
was incredible. Like visually, auditorially, the acting, like firing on all cylinders.
Definitely.
And it's so incredible to watch Hearts of Darkness and see how Francis Ford Coppola went from feeling like this would be the first movie to win a Nobel Prize to feeling like if he was getting graded on it, he would get an F. In that it was just going to be a complete failure.
Yeah, and his wife was like trying to give him like a long leash. It's like, well, maybe it's not going to be your best movie ever, but maybe you'll get like, you know, a theoretical B. Like it'll be good, but like not amazing. And he's like, no, I'm going to fail.
So I came out of this movie. When it ended, the only thing that I wanted to say was, wow.
Wow.
I was floored.
Me too.
Particularly by the last like quarter of this movie. Because it were the first huge chunk of it really does feel like an odyssey with little vignettes here and there. You know, it's like
in
you
a
got
good
the part
way.
with Kilgore, you got the part in the trenches, you got the part with the Playboy Bunny show. And it takes such a unique turn towards the end, especially when Marlon Brando is monologuing. He's really like trying to cast Martin Sheen under a spell, kind of the way he has the other characters in the movie, and just like draw him in. And he does the same to the audience. It's like you spend so long looking at his face and just kind of, you know.
They lit him like with a lot of golden light, sort of like he is a god. Like it is very like heavenly light almost, you know?
I really thought it was a smart, brilliant choice. On a technical side, it was kind of strange seeing those particular shots because it almost looked like some of them were shot on 16 millimeter. Like it looked when we're on the long takes of Marlon Brando's face when he's talking, the quality of the version that we watched on this Blu-ray looked like those shots were filmed on 16 millimeter, until it cut away. And then at one point it cut back to him and it looked full quality.
That's so strange.
It looked like full 35 millimeter. But then they cut back and they cut back. And then all of a sudden it was back to that low, like substandard
Maybe they
quality.
messed up the remaster.
I'm not really sure why.
Yeah.
Because the rest of the film looked incredible.
I think maybe it was just an issue with the print. Like they didn't have a high quality print of, because there's print degradation. You take
degradation.
Yeah, you take the master print and then you have like copies of the print.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, with digital cinema, it's straight across the board.
Yeah.
Maybe they just didn't have a high quality version of those prints, and they would need to go in to like that would be one reason to watch the final cut, is maybe there's like a remaster of everything. I don't know.
Possible. Speaking of film stock, I can actually tell you, because you were wondering during this movie, what film
the color
stock
grading was amazing.
It was shot on 35 millimeter Eastman 100T 5247.
I thought it was Kodak.
If you can get your hands on some Eastman 100T 5247, then
I will.
And the cinematography skills of the person who shot Apocalypse Now, then
the Kodak
yeah,
is really
baby,
just
you got a stew going.
The way that it's just a perfect synergy between the right balance of cool tones and warm tones, in my opinion. I was thinking this, and I'll say it out loud, I can't believe it, but one of the biggest inspirations in my wedding photography style-wise is Apocalypse Now. Just like the beautiful golden lighting, the hair lights, the dramatic shadows, like the beautiful blues and the army greens. That's the way I always want to see a green. That, if there's one thing that's across the board in my work, is I don't like a yellowy green. I'm all about the army blue toned green.
Interesting. Yeah.
So I was like in love with it. I was like, oh, the greens look amazing. The jungles look perfect. Just even the shots of like Martin Sheen in the boat where he's like tanned and he has like glistening with like sweat.
Yeah.
And you could see like his blue eyes just looking. I'm like, this is perfect. Like just all the shots was just like, it's just like, this is all I need. The shots are just like, the color grading is, and the lighting is just perfect. Like I could just look at these shots and not care about the plot at all, honestly. And that speaks volumes, because not every film was like that.
Yeah. Did you find yourself drawn into the plot?
Yeah, for sure. But it was definitely like, compared to other aspects of the film, it was lower on the totem pole. But I think it was very compelling. Yeah. And I think having a good lead actor that just draws you in just with his like facial expressions is very important, because, as a visual medium, I think telling a very strong visual story is very important.
Yeah. I think the thing that I found most intriguing about the plot is that as the movie progresses, you're not really sure if Martin Sheen is going to go through with it.
Absolutely.
It kind of seems it's at some points like once he sees him, he might not kill him. He might decide to join him, especially considering that somebody, Colby, was sent on an identical mission.
We didn't see him. Is he dead, I guess?
No, we saw him.
We did?
Yeah.
When?
When they first arrived and he met the photojournalist, he walked up and he was like, he said Colby, and he just didn't say anything. So it seemed, clear that the previous person who was sent on that mission decided not to kill Kurtz and decided to join Kurtz. So it's like, is the same thing going to happen to Martin Sheen? And Martin Sheen doesn't even really know. Even once he sees him, he's like, I thought I would know what to do once I saw him, but he doesn't. And it's really only once it becomes clear, the car alarm is still going on.
I know.
It's only once it becomes clear to Martin Sheen that that Kurtz seems to want to die, then he was like, okay, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I really like that monologue at the end, because it really gave all the motivation you needed, where it's like, he wants to die. He wants to be out of his misery. Like, I'm sure a lot of veterans, their minds are messed up and they feel like there's no clear way to the other side. But he just wants to die like a soldier. He wants to die standing up. He doesn't want to die in like a wimpy way.
Sure.
So they're like, this is his perspective as another soldier. He's like, I'm gonna do this because it's what he wants necessarily. So
yeah. I found it engrossing, especially by that point in the movie. It just takes such that weird turn of like having a weird existential experience while watching the movie and just like seeing the screen and seeing everything that's going down. It really transitioned from the beginning to the end from like a typical kind of horrors of war kind of movie to more like a 2001 Space Odyssey cinematic experience kind of thing. That I came out of that movie thinking like, wow, I really just experienced something remarkable.
Yeah, because the way he killed him was during a ritual festival that was in a thunderstorm, and they were also killing. They said it was a caribou or something.
In Hearts of Darkness, they said it was a caribou, but it was just like a water buffalo.
Yeah, and so they had the oh my goodness, had the parallel editing of them massacring the water buffalo and Kurtz. And I think that was well done because they kind of pulled back from the audience. They didn't show that brutality in close-ups necessarily, but they showed the brutality of the animal. Yeah, and you could pick up on that detail, like that's what's happening without showing it necessarily.
And it was even more visceral because you know that if they show a shot of Marlon Brando getting cut with a machete, that it's going to be fake.
Yes.
But seeing the shots of the water buffalo were real.
Yeah.
And it just was like, it was like, ugh. You know, it makes the hit feel so much harder, you know?
Yeah.
And you extrapolate, like that's what's going on to Marlon Brando's character right now.
I definitely see that as a way more effective form of storytelling.
It was incredible. I thought this whole movie was incredible.
For sure. There's another scene that we haven't really touched on. I think it was Larry Fishburne's character, which I didn't really realize at the time until I saw it.
14-year-old Lawrence Fishburne, who, according to my trivia, lied about his age in order to get the part. A common practice for men under 18 during American wars.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I think they gave it to him because, it was the real life situation of a young person at war. And he nailed it. I mean, he didn't look 14 to me. Anyways, he looked more like he was like 18.
Sure.
But he was listening to like a recording of his mom talking about like their life and like how she wants him to come back and stuff. Yeah. And that's played over him dying and them crying around him. Yeah. And it really just shows another instance of the stupidity and the brutalness of war where, we have this young kid. They're all just having fun and games before this. And then instantly in a moment, he's just gone. He got caught in the crossfires and, his mom, like there was a future for him. Like his parent or his grandparents were saving up to buy him a car. Yep. She loves him. She doesn't want him to get killed. And that's just all gone in an instance. And I think that was a beautiful way to show that for sure.
Such incredible vignettes in this movie. And that was Lawrence Fishburne's real mom.
Oh,
yeah,
that would make me cry. I think.
Yeah,
like the mom seeing like herself being like, "I love you. Don't get yourself killed," and like watching her son. Oh my goodness,
really powerful.
Yeah.
So I'll divert to some trivia, and I'll rattle some of these off because I have kind of a lot. And we saw plenty of trivia in Hearts of Darkness, which was a great documentary. But obviously this episode...
We love filmmaking, so...
Yeah, the episode of this podcast is definitely more focused on Apocalypse Now than Hearts of Darkness. In fact, I wrote Hearts of Darkness on the chalkboard behind me, but you can't see it because it's blocked.
Right.
But great documentary. So a couple pieces of trivia here. More than a year had passed between the filming of Willard and Chef searching the jungle for mangoes and encountering the tiger and the immediately following shots of the same scene of Chef clambering back into the boat, ripping off his shirt and screaming. There was a year.
Oh, man.
So it's sort of the same thing that happened with Lawrence of Arabia is like by the time they got to the bottom of the stairs, he was a year older. Right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I mean, well, this movie took forever, but I think it's really funny because I feel like more movies have came out since then have taken way, way longer than Apocalypse Now. Like it took less than a year, but it's an extremely involved movie with extremely involved cinematography and bombs and real life helicopters with real life soldiers.
No
it
CGI.
makes sense that it took a year. Yeah. No kidding. Of course.
Super complicated.
Especially, but like something like Eyes Wide Shut that took just over a year. And it's Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman just kind of puttering around like mansions and apartments and stuff.
Well, they probably did like 300 takes of each shot.
Yeah, I think Kubrick was into doing that. But like just the perspective is like everyone is on Francis Ford Coppola like, "Oh, when's your film going to get finished? When's it going to get finished?" Like, you know, he would be practicing a complicated shot for like a whole day, and then like he wouldn't have the people that he needed, or they would take the copters away. Of course it's going to take him a year. Come on, people. Like, it's hard to make a film already, and he has extreme circumstances.
People don't know how hard it is to make movies.
No kidding.
And how expensive.
Yeah.
Seriously.
And what I really appreciated, he put his money where his mouth was.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm putting up my own money towards this. I have to get it done because otherwise I'm out the money, and I committed to this project, and I can't quit because it's my film.
Yeah. He had to mortgage his house and his Napa Valley winery to finish the film.
Mm-hmm. Well, his wife was kind of like,
do what you gotta do.
You know, he's talented. He made the 2 Godfathers already. I'm pretty sure if he fails at this project, he'll find something else to make money. We'll be fine. Yeah. So she was like, all right, whatever, do what you gotta do. I believe in you.
Yeah.
So I think that's extremely helpful because he seemed like he was losing his mind. But she was like, it was really interesting to see because, you know, they'd been together a while. It was like almost thrilling to see him in his mind. And I found that really interesting.
Mm-hmm. It was nice to see that she was the one who had recorded most of the footage for the documentary and recorded those conversations.
Yeah, like without him knowing. So you get like a really authentic thing of him telling, because if you're on screen, you might try to sugarcoat it a little bit more, like, you know, this film is hard to work on, like it's, you know, whatever, we'll get there. But him saying to her like, I'm failing. This movie is going to be terrible because he didn't know. And I think that's really compelling to get someone that's close to you to interview you because you're going to say your truth. You're not going to lie to them. And I think that was really cool.
Yeah, we'll keep that in mind for the future.
Yeah.
So
I would love to do what she did and like go to another country with you and film lots of stuff. I think that'd be amazing. It'd be so fun.
Mm-hmm. So more pieces of trivia. The Philippines had no professional film laboratories at the time, meaning the raw camera negatives had to be shipped to the U.S. to be processed.
Wow.
Thus, the entire movie was shot blind. Francis Ford Coppola never saw a shot on film until after returning to California.
Oh my gosh. That's even more impressive.
Dead. Dinosaur.
I know. Who wants that? There was a couple shots that had like soft focus, but not very many.
No.
And for the most part, it was, you know, it was lit and shot amazingly. They had a great team. And I can't believe that. And like, just even shipping it back to the States. What if it gets lost? What if it gets waterlogged? What if the plane like goes under? Not after all that.
Yep. I wonder how long it took to make copies.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Couldn't make copies there, I guess.
Nope. He didn't see any of it. He didn't see dailies. He didn't know how it was going.
Ridiculous. No wonder it took so long. Man.
Just touching on this again with cinema is, you know, someone that's great like Francis Ford Coppola, who made, you know, very cinematically important films, The Godfather Part 1 and 2. You know, those are pretty renowned as like one of the top movies in cinema. Him saying at the end of Hearts of Darkness is, you know, it's amazing with lighter cameras coming out, with cheaper cameras coming out. He was saying like 16 millimeter or something because that was like the newest thing at the time.
I think he was talking about 8 millimeter tape cameras. Because I think those movies, not the movies, I think those interviews were shot closer to the 90s.
Yeah, much later because he had gray hair.
Yeah.
But him saying like, it's amazing that these things are coming out because they're more accessible, they're lighter, they're cheaper. You know, he said a fat girl in Ohio, which I found strange, his phrasing. But he's basically saying like anyone can go out there and make something and be the greatest.
Yeah,
and that it's, you know, there's no gatekeeping anymore. And I found that really awesome and compelling.
He wants the barrier to entry to be torn down and to remove the air of professional, not professionalism, but, you know, the idea that you have to be a professional to shoot film. He wants to tear that down, which I found really nice and refreshing. Something that Quentin Tarantino probably does not feel the same way about.
I think it's because he's secure as a filmmaker. He knows his talents. He knows what he can do with it. He knows that it's a hard job. No one's taking that away from him. Mm-hmm. If someone else wants to make a film and wants to do something more accessible, then, the more the merrier.
Yeah.
Whereas someone like Quentin Tarantino, I think, frankly, he's threatened by someone being better than him. And he should be threatened.
Interesting.
Like Francis Ford Coppola, amazing director. I'm not going to say every single one of his films is like knock it out of the park.
He had a hot streak.
He is up there for sure.
Yeah.
One thing I found really interesting as well that I wanted to touch on very briefly was The Outsiders. Was based on a book. They shot everything, the definitive sort of book version. But that was not the theatrical cut. They cut a ton out of the theatrical cut, and it was not as similar to the book. And then 20 years later, I think, they did the definitive novel version, a director's cut. And that, in my mind, a fan of The Outsiders, is the only way to see that film.
Which one did we watch?
We watched the novel, the definitive
Did we really?
version.
Oh,
yeah, because the theatrical cut cuts like a ton of the ending parts out. And in my mind, it just doesn't make as much narrative sense and really takes away a lot of the story elements of it. Whereas something like this, it's a little more vignettes of things going on and stuff. And I could see how leaving stuff on the cutting room floor is okay. But going into it, I was like, I'm not sure we should watch the theatrical cut because another one of his films, the only way I want to see it is the director's cut version. So,
yeah,
very interesting.
I'm typically a fan of director's cuts.
Mm-hmm.
Like Watchmen, the director's cut is really good. Batman versus Superman, Ultimate Edition, I think it's called, is great. Well, I've actually never seen the theatrical version, but the theatrical version is the one that everybody hated. And the director's cut, I thought was really good.
Yeah, because it fills in some of the character, like the nuances. But I feel like for this film, all of the character elements you need are there. They tell a full and complete story. Yeah. Whereas The Outsiders, it cut off the ending of the book. And it didn't tell a complete story. And it left a lot to be said that they had filmed. So why not do it?
Have to do some more research on that. I think The Blues Brothers is another movie where there's an extended version that's awesome. So I'll just rattle off a couple more pieces of trivia.
For sure.
In a 2006 interview, screenwriter John Milieu, I think that's how you say it, said that after he had written the now famous line, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning," he thought to himself, this is over the top. This will be the first thing they take out.
It's definitely, when I heard that line, I was like, oh, I've heard this before.
Yeah. John Milieu explained how he had come up with the title Apocalypse Now. Apparently, this was derived from a very popular tattoo among the hippie community of a peace sign that said Nirvana Now. Milieu, by adding just a couple of extra lines, edited the peace symbol to make it look like a circle with a B-52 bomber in the middle and changed the slogan to Apocalypse Now.
That's cool. I was looking at this to see if it was in there, the
symbol.
Yeah, but no.
Yeah. And apparently they since they had no credits in the movie, they weren't able to like copyright the movie as Apocalypse Now unless the title appeared in the film. So then they wrote it as the motto with graffiti, our motto, Apocalypse Now, which you see in the film.
Yes. In the Kurtz part at the end.
There's the car alarm again. I think it's a symbol that we should wrap up shortly. Yeah. But Francis Ford Coppola went to UCLA Film School with all the members of The Doors, including Jim Morrison, who agreed to let Coppola use the master recordings of their music for his Vietnam film. The 5.5-hour early assembly cut of the movie was scored entirely using songs by The Doors before an actual score was created. Even separate from using the end by The Doors, I think that the music of this movie was also very excellent and effective.
Sets the time period perfectly. Yeah. Like you see people with the flared pants, you see crazy Dennis Hopper hippie character with the different cameras and stuff. It really sets the tone for what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it puts you into the time of the late 60s and
in the same way that Forrest Gump, the sound, the music is very tied to the era he's in, especially like the Vietnam War. I think the same is said for this for sure.
Yeah. The scene in which the helicopters swoop in on the village while playing The Ride of the Valkyries was meant to be an ironic comment on the Vietnam War. In the original Wagner opera Der Ring des Nibelungen, the Valkyries arrive at a point of apparent victory, which later results in defeat. The apparent victory in the helicopter battle would be followed by the eventual defeat in the war.
I think I found Dennis Hopper's character really interesting simply for the fact of the many cameras.
Yeah.
And we'd seen sort of there's a scene I laughed pretty hard at of Francis Ford Coppola being like, "Don't look at the camera, keep fighting, keep fighting."
Keep running out like you're still fighting. He's like, what?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah, because I feel like it only draws more attention to yourself.
Yeah.
But as like a documentary camera person, I found that really compelling because sometimes you're trying to get like a really nice candid, like trying to capture something authentically, and people are like, looking for the camera and stuff, and you're like, no, I'm not here. And I think if I was drafted in the war, I probably, if I had to do something in the war, I would probably choose to be a journalist.
Photojournalist?
Yeah. I think like I was saying this, like I think it would have been so fun and so compelling to get shots like that, but at what cost? Because I'm a pacifist generally. Like I think war is pointless and it's just massacre for massacre's sake, and I wouldn't want to condone those actions. It would be hard to watch from the sidelines, but I think it would be very fascinating to be a fly on the wall during those moments.
Definitely. The last thing that I want to touch on really is when they said that George Lucas was apparently going to direct this to start.
Yeah.
I find that so interesting because I feel like this movie is the complete opposite of Star Wars.
It is.
Like, it's so the anti-Star Wars. Star Wars is like, triumphant, good versus evil, good guys win, and blaster out your side and a lightsaber and cool moments and dun 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 dun.
It would have been like a completely different movie.
Yeah, like I don't think he had done Star Wars yet at that point.
Right. But he had done whatever his sci-fi movie is.
THX 1138.
That's a lot more dramatically lit and tonally different, I think. So
and also starred
those...
Robert Duvall.
Oh, yeah. I think that's that should go on our watch list because, I think that's the only George Lucas film I haven't seen. So,
yeah, I do want to watch that as well. Robert Duvall, by the way, like, did you recognize Robert Duvall? Did you know what he was from?
I honestly, a lot of these characters I didn't recognize until after. Like, they're interviewing Dennis Hopper older, and I was like, that was Dennis Hopper? What?
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I've seen Easy Rider. I should have known, but anyways.
And then also, so Robert Duvall, like, do you know what he's from?
I know he's famous, but I don't remember for what.
Have you seen the first Godfather?
Yes.
So he played Tom in The Godfather, who I think was the consigliere to Marlon Brando.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've ever seen To Kill a Mockingbird, the movie, he played Boo Radley in that movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting. I don't think I have seen that with Gregory Peck.
Yeah. He was much younger at that point.
I would imagine so, because it was like a black and white movie.
It was black and white, yeah.
Yeah, that was like the 50s or something.
50s or 60s.
That'll have to go on my watch
No,
list.
I think it was the 60s because I think the book was written in the 60s, about the 30s.
Is Shelley Duvall his daughter?
I don't know.
Interesting.
I'll have to look that up.
Anyways, he did a great job with what he had. I found his character really interesting with the cowboy hat. Obviously, I didn't like his character, but I found his character really funny and interesting. So.
He definitely inspired, at least visually, the look of a character in Metal Gear Solid who has the yellow neckerchief kind of thing.
There's definitely a lot of shared DNA between this and Full Metal Jacket. Like, I feel like the drill sergeant is bringing maybe some of that energy that Robert Duvall character is. So,
well, he was in this movie. He was a helicopter pilot.
Oh.
Very,
cool.
very briefly.
Interesting.
So wrapping up, final thoughts about Apocalypse Now. I loved it. I think I loved it because I went in not only not expecting very much, but also knowing what to expect because I had seen the beginning. But I would give this like a 9 out of 10, probably. I think it was... I hesitate to call it a masterpiece, but if it's not a masterpiece, it's really close.
I think some of the greatest moments of the film take place after the first half-hour mark. I mean, sure, the opening is very compelling, but then it kind of gets into some expositional moments towards the beginning, and I could see where you can maybe drop off as an audience member. But I think to the people out there that haven't seen it yet, just sit through the whole thing, because there's a lot of great moments that you're going to miss otherwise. And if you really appreciate cinematography, strong lighting techniques, you're in for a treat, at least in that regard, even if it's not as compelling to you as a person.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting much for this movie. I didn't really know anything. I had forgot that Martin Sheen starred in this movie. And as I saw Martin Sheen on the screen, I was like, oh, Martin Sheen, that's right. I remember Rob Lowe talking about him making this movie in his book. And it's just great. It just ended up being beyond my expectations, because I'm not really into war films. I'm not.
Me neither.
This seems more like a guy's movie.
Maybe
in some
ways.
regards. But
I
found
not
it
very many women in it.
No, I don't think there's any. I don't know if there's any women with speaking roles. But I mean, war is mostly masculine, so whatever. Yeah. But I found it really compelling and interesting, just from a cinematic perspective, and I think it is definitely worth a watch, especially if you love cinematography, because it is a masterclass in cinematography, for sure. I think I might give it a 9 as well. Yeah. I didn't think I was going to. I don't think Marlon Brando was the strongest part of this film, but he wasn't a weak link by any means.
No.
I found all the characters to be really well done. And it was just, it was a really interesting ride. The music, the sound was all great. The editing, for the most part, was quite good as well. There was maybe one or two things I was like, that was kind of a weird edit, but for the most part, it was great. So yeah, 9, which I don't give away very freely. So yeah, this is great.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So strong recommendation from me. Strong recommendation for Hannah, the documentary Hearts of Darkness as well. If you can, pick up the Blu-ray, because there's plenty of interesting special features on there. I saw that they have the actual performance by, what's his name? Citizen Kane.
Oh, yep.
What's his name? Tell me.
Orson Welles.
Yeah, of the original radio drama. So that's really cool.
That was really interesting how they tied that in with Hearts of Darkness.
Yeah.
And I think Hearts of Darkness is definitely worth a watch. I think it's a great companion piece to this. And I think it certainly gave me a lot more perspective and a lot more appreciation for this film, that it even got made and that it was even good at all. Because by all accounts, it should have been terrible. So, and I think it's a really good perspective of the plight of a filmmaker, a plight of an artist, just trying to get anything made at all, just to get it finished, despite not even being good or anything. So I think that's a really great watch as well.
When you have talented and hardworking people all coming together on a project, you can move mountains.
Definitely.
And right around Marlon Brando's annoying habits.
Yeah.
So I want to say to the audience, thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We got one episode left, and we're hoping to make it a pretty special one. If you've listened to every episode so far, first of all, thank you so much. And second, reach out and let me know what your favorite episode was, because I would really be curious to know. And I've had a lot of fun doing this podcast so far. And this is the end. The next episode will be the end of its, let's say, original run. Don't know if we'll pick it back up, but possibly. And I hope to end it with a bang.
For sure.
In the next episode.
I love the excuse to watch new movies we've been missing out on with you, and I love the excuse to talk about cinema with you. We're still always going to be watching movies, and we're going to be talking about cinema no matter what. We just won't be doing it on mic. But it's definitely bittersweet, because it was a good excuse to use it as homework to watch some really great films.
Yeah, and we'll continue to do so.
Yeah.
So, once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining me, Hannah, and can't wait to come back with our final episode. And we'll see you then.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.